Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The US Grand Prix is here and it does not look good for Ferrari. A heat hazard has been declared yet again. We know what happened in Singapore to both Ferrari cars when they were struggling with brake issues all race long. Could a similar thing reoccur this weekend in Austin? What does George Russell have to say on his new Mercedes contract and the amount of money that he might be getting paid to make this happen? But also, what about 2027 and this big rumour as to what could still be in motion behind the scenes? Valmont and Troy, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We're going to start with all these special liveries going. Well, actually, we're going to start here. Happy birthday, Charles Leclerc. We'll see if he's smiling come Sunday. This is the Mercedes special outfit anyway. These are their new race suits for the weekends. They've got the cowboy hats on. I don't really know why their teams are obsessed with doing special things for the US Grand Prix, but we do not have one special livery. We have 6, and the Mercedes are running the same livery, but they've got these special race suits. So basically, everyone is using something. These are the 6 liveries in question. We saw the Haas one the other day, and I'm going to go through these one at a time because some of these are kind of interesting for various different reasons. But these are the side profiles of the Haas, the Visa Cash App Racing Bull, the McLaren. They're bringing back this chrome feature, which they have done for this Grand Prix, I think, before. The Williams is actually pretty spectacular. The Aston Martin's very interesting, and the Alpine is probably the one with the most talking points. So we showed you the Haas the other day. Let's just move on from that. It's nothing special. This is the Racing Bull, and look, they've gone for this whole, I don't know what you want to even call it, like tortoise pattern or something. There's a couple of images that have gone around, and Liam Lawson's actually playing this part, I think, here particularly well. But these are what the cars look like. Is it as good as a livery as their standard one? I'm not so convinced, but it is what it is. There's also the Aston Martin. Now, this is pretty cool because there was a comment that came out today of Andy Cowland said that when they need to get Adrian Newey's attention, they don't like to do it because he's in such a trance-like state when he's working on the 2026 car that he's almost, I mean, he's in flow state, right? When Adrian Newey's designing this car, they don't want to knock on the door and interrupt him because they fear that it will, affect his concentration, right? But I don't know necessarily inspired by that precisely, but I thought it was a kind of cool touch. We've not really seen too many special liveries like this. All these equations on the car, all the physics. I actually thought it was kind of nice, a bit nerdy like that. But it's not just the car they're doing the livery for. They've also got the drivers have their own race suits. As I say, I don't know why every team has turned up to Austin with something different, but here's Lance Stroll. That was Fernando Alonso. There's also this angle of it as well, so you can see properly the front wing, the rear wing, what it's going to look like. Is it going to turn heads? Not so sure. This is another angle of it. Look, it's kind of the same, but there's more yellow with the Aramco and everything, and then they've got the equations front and rear. This is probably the one that most people are talking about, and that is the Williams, right? This is a proper throwback livery to some of the old Williams liveries where they used to have much more white on the car. Certainly like early 2000s, right? There's a lot of that going on here. This is pretty nice, I'm not going to lie. As far as special liveries go, this actually is pretty special. We talk a lot about, oh, livery, special livery, but most of these liveries are not particularly special, let's be real. This one is actually going to be quite good. As I say, there are going to be so many of these different liveries on the car this weekend that it might even be difficult at first glance to figure out what car is which probably isn't ideal. But it simply is what it is, and that's the Williams throwback. There's also the McLaren, so we've effectively seen this livery or a very similar one before. It's to do with the Google partnership. They've got the Gemini thing here big. They've got the Chrome, as we know. Zach Brown cooking up a masterclass there. But this is probably the one that's worthy of the most discussion. Might not look like it on paper, but it's not really about the livery itself because, okay, it's got a bit of yellow on it. It's about why is there yellow on the Alpine. That's because Mercado Libre, they are doing the big sponsorship here, right? And this is not just a special livery for Austin. This is a special livery for Austin, Mexico, and Brazil. So the next 3 races, all in the Americas, they're running this special livery sponsored by a massive company in South America. I think they're headquartered out of Uruguay, but effectively Mercado Libre came on board, at least in part, because of Franco Colapinto, right? Now, would you put it past Flavio Briatore to take the money from that deal, tell them that, oh yeah, Colapinto's definitely part of our plans, and then drop him anyway? No, it's possible, but I think it does, and I'm sure this has been planned for some time, but I think it does increase the chances that Colapinto stays around. We know that he has many fans in that region, we know that he has many sponsors in that region, and if he was performing atrociously, then sure, you could justify getting rid of him. But given that he's not, and he's been respectable compared to Gasly in recent rounds, if not, you could argue, somewhat better, then Mercado Libre and the other sponsors and backing that he has makes it very difficult to imagine that Colapinto is going to be going anywhere. So that's the update on the special liveries. As I say, it would be nice if we brought back some actual special liveries at some point in the future. But let's talk about the drama going into the US Grand Prix. I wanted to start here with George Russell. We saw his contract was locked in yesterday officially. Thomas Maher from Planet F1 says his seat is in danger of being kept warm for Verstappen next year. Now, it's not quite as simple as that. I listened to the video that the race put out on this last night. They heavily implied that the deal is multi-year. We've heard loads of rumours that it's multi-year. Everyone was telling us yesterday this is a multi-year deal apart from Mercedes. But of course a multi-year deal could mean a 1+1, right? Where technically it involves 2027, but not really, depending on who wants to extend it. But the video that the race did implied that actually, no, it is a deal until 2027. Both teams just don't want to talk about it, or both parties, the team and the driver, don't want to talk about it because the risk to a certain degree goes both ways. And this is what George Russell says here in this exclusive that The Athletic got. And I'll just kind of scroll through and give you guys some of his comments. It was very nice. It all worked out exactly as I knew and the team knew that it would. But obviously, publicly, there were many questions for many months. It's good that it's concluded now. Now we can look forward. He goes on to say, 100% I feel ready to fight for a world championship. I've always known I've got the speed. I've always known that I could do it. But this year, I've probably been the most complete driver that I've been in my whole career. Don't disagree with him on that. I'm the happiest I've been in my personal life. That's a big change for him as well, to let him perform better on the track, let's say. But of course there's talk about this multi-year agreement, and Russell says the understanding has always been there that we want to win together and continue together, but as I've said, contracts in F1 don't really mean a huge amount, and it all comes down to performance. It's got to be mutually beneficial, and that's the other thing that George puts into context, because I think there's been a lot of talk, and for good reason, that Mercedes next year expected to be very good. Rumour has it their engine produces 571 brake horsepower, that's just the combustion side. Their rivals may be a similar ballpark, they may be slightly below. The integration with the hybrid, that's going to be, of course, the key challenge. And because Mercedes are expected to be very good, it's understandable that people are thinking, well, you know, Mercedes, they got to sign George, or Russell really needs to sign with Mercedes. But also, it is possible that the current competitive position of Mercedes is maintained. What if McLaren turn up next year with the Mercedes power unit and they keep putting Mercedes in the dirt? At which point, George Russell will reasonably consider whether another team could be better for him, right? Because in the same way that Charles Leclerc feels like he's in his prime right now, George Russell is starting to feel the same. Russell doesn't feel old. I mean, I think he's 27. Charles just turns, 28, I guess, today. They've still got a long time ahead of them, of course, but, you know, time's ticking, right? They've got to win the championship in the next few years if they're going to win it at all, you would think. And George, that's kind of what he says, and implies that, you know, signing a long-term deal with Mercedes in the same way that Leclerc has done with Ferrari, in the same way that Max has done, although with some get-out clauses with Red Bull and Lando with McLaren, for example, all these longer-term deals, that's not quite the case for George at Mercedes, and there is some talk that Russell would have wanted a longer-term deal, but maybe he wouldn't have done. Maybe he actually likes it as it is, with the possibility that if in 2027 things aren't going to plan at Mercedes, and again they just can't get on top of another cycle of regulations, Russell is then free to go away. And as he says, as long as I'm performing, I'm not worried about a 2, 3, 4, 5-year deal on the table. That doesn't help me sleep at night. As long as I'm performing, that helps him know that he's in the best position. And as I said yesterday, if Russell turns up and wins next year's championship with Mercedes, it's going to be difficult to imagine they're going to drop him for Max, right, in that scenario. He goes on to say, I'm not getting carried away with any excitement for next year. Excitement doesn't bring anything, nor does hope in our world. It's got to be hard work, dedication, trusting the process, making sure the culture is right. I really think, though, he says, that everything is in place. This year has been the real year that we've recognised we need to get the right things in place. So when we go for next year, we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to win. That's what he has to say. How much money is he getting paid? Good question. There was some talk a while ago that he was going to get paid 30 million euros, I think, a season was the report. Now the Mirror say that it's 30 million pounds a season, which is, significantly more. I think that would probably make him the third best paid driver on the grid behind Max and Lewis, right? So puts George right up there. I think very much well deserved. And look, it's a considerable amount of money. I don't know what Kimi Antonelli's getting paid, but it is certainly not that. The other interesting development for Motorsport Italia, so again, Italian press, take it as you will, and this second part of the sentence is I don't know, want to say deranged exactly, but there's a lot to unpack here. So George Russell's contract apparently includes a clause allowing him to leave Mercedes at the end of 2026 if the car is not competitive. So this aligns with what we understand, that the deal actually may well include a 2027 component, but there are performance elements on both sides. Mercedes may drop Russell if he's not good enough. They may have ways and clauses to do that. And maybe it is just a 1+1, but let's say it's a 2+1 or 2+0 or something. But there are deals halfway through. For example, Hamilton was announced for 2024 and 2025 with Mercedes, but it turned out that he could exercise a clause to leave if he wanted to. That's what he did. So, as Russell says, what do contracts really mean? The second thing, though, is fascinating. For Mercedes, if Russell departs, it could create an opportunity to bring in Verstappen. But hang on a second, right? So, in this hypothetical scenario where Mercedes failed to execute in 2026 and George decides his future is best spent elsewhere, there would be interest in George, I'm sure, for the market in that circumstance. Merc are then going to get Max. So Max is going to see a team that presumably hasn't nailed it in 2026 to such an extent that Russell is willing to break up his decade-long partnership with that team and go elsewhere, potentially Aston, and then Max is going to slot in there instead. Maybe possible, but seems pretty unlikely, right? Like, if Russell's going to leave Mercedes, I can't imagine Max is going to be chomping at the bit to join, depending on how bad Red Bull might be next year. But in a world where Russell departs and goes to, let's say, Aston Martin, if they really do deliver next year, as a hypothetical, Max would also be chasing the Aston Martin seat, not the Mercedes seat that George wants to vacate. So I'm not sure really how relevant that piece of the puzzle is, but it's nonetheless pretty interesting. Now let's talk about Ferrari, because again, lots of scrutiny about this team over the last few days. Fred Vasseur has definitely been feeling the pressure. Now, there have been a couple of interesting articles today saying that there's no truth to the idea that they're going to sack Fred Vasseur and bring in Christian Horner. So now often you tend to find this happens, right? So rumours start to emerge, and then somebody wants to shut it down. So they put a few feelers out to the press, and then you get some journalists start to say that it's wide of the mark. Like, we see this type of stuff a lot. So Planet F1 are saying it's wide of the mark. And we then get Sky Sports Italia saying it's wide of the mark, right? No talks between Horner and Elkan and all of this. Now, sources the other day would dispute that and say that there are things ongoing. Other sources say that's not true. Elkan instead has shown full confidence in Vasseur's leadership and reaffirmed his commitment to ensuring continuity in the Ferrari project. So what do we really believe here? Do we think that the smoke a few days ago was totally without any fire at all? Or is it more likely that Ferrari are saying a couple of things to the media to try and calm down some of the pressure on Fred? Because, as I said the other day, nobody is suggesting that Vasseur is getting sacked right now when they're bringing in Horner next week. We know that Horner cannot work in F1 again until the middle of next year. We think at least May 2026, maybe April, but at least May, June 2026 until he's even available to work. So they're not sacking Vasseur yet, that's for sure. What are you going to do for the next 8 months, right? It's just not going to happen. So the point is that if he is going to get sacked, it ain't happening yet. So again, there's a bit of nuance here, and there was also some discussion that in an ideal world, Ferrari might like to have both. Whether you think that's fair or not, whether you think Vasseur or Horner would like that, is also a different question. Mattia Binotto was even asked to comment on the drama at Ferrari, and he said, I feel their pain, like the Tifosi. And for the many people working in Maranello who put their hearts into this, it's not easy to live with these results. I can say that I'm sorry, but professionally, I've turned the page, and I have my ambitious goals to achieve with Audi. So pretty funny, I guess. Look, is anyone looking back at the Mattia Binotto days and thinking, wow, I wish we had that again if you're a Ferrari fan? I'm not so sure, but you know, I guess there's always a little bit of rose-tinted glasses there sometimes, and like they did occasionally win under Binotto, whereas right now they're not winning anything at all. But next year, of course, will be the key turning point. But again, frustrations as to the way that this weekend is likely to play out. Now, auto racers say that Maranello are confident this weekend is going to be different. Now, the W16 is a very interesting one because they did bring a more flexible front wing to the Singapore Grand Prix. They have found a way, Mercedes and Red Bull it seems, this season to develop their rear wings and their front wings, especially the front wings, in such a way to get around some of the anti-flexi wing regulations that came in for the Spanish Grand Prix. Ferrari never really pursued that technology any further. Mercedes definitely did. And it seemed to pay dividends in Singapore. It was a surprise to them as much as to us that Mercedes in the hot conditions of Singapore were as competitive as they were. As a result, they are expecting to be competitive again in Austin. It's been a better track for them over the last few years. The front wing flexibility may give them more advantage. Maybe the tyres aren't going to be as much of a disaster. But, you know, the amount of times that we have seen Mercedes think that they've turned a corner, think that they understand it in these regulations, and it's not quite happens. This whole cycle of regulations for Mercedes has been dominated by consistent underperformance and then the occasional just dominant weekend out of nowhere. So whether Singapore will be an example of that or whether Austin they can continue some of that success, I expect them to be competitive. Do I think George is going to win again? Not necessarily, but I think he should be in the mix. The Ferrari, however, certainly from the fan perspective, us looking in from the outside, not so much confidence, right? It was hot in Singapore in terms of humidity, very hot. But in terms of raw temperature, hot, but not as hot as Austin. Austin's expected to be hotter in the low 30s, and it's going to be dry, it's going to be hot. There's not been any rain there in a while. We know what it's like in Texas at this time of year. But Ferrari, according to insights from Maranello, they believe that their recent competitiveness loss stems more from poor weekend execution than from the car's baseline, particularly evident in Baku and Singapore. Again, this does align a little bit with one of the rumours the other day that there was let's say, a heated discussion between Fred Vasseur and one of the top engineers in Tognanelli. Now, report has it he's pretty responsible for setup decisions, and we did see in Baku, and even in Singapore to a certain extent, at times the car was in the mix, and then when it mattered, it fell away drastically from the mix, right? And that was true in qualifying. Unfortunately, in the race, the car is plagued with numerous issues, not least, of course, the lift and coast requirements. That's for temperatures all around, but especially in the hot conditions, the temperatures of the brakes. We know what happened. Charles Leclerc was doing lift and coast the whole race in Singapore, and when Hamilton was finally told, or he just decided, you know what, I'm on a fresh set of tyres, let's see what this baby can do, and he pushed, as soon as he got into the dirty air of the car in front, his brakes just gave up on him totally. So even if Ferrari are able to extract better performance in qualifying due to better race weekend execution by not making the mistakes they've made with setup changes over the last few weekends, is it going to turn their form around in the race? Especially because the FIA for the second race in a row has declared an official heat hazard. They've declared that it'll be over 31 degrees at some point between the sprint or the race. This doesn't mean the drivers have to wear the cooling vests that many of them did wear in Singapore. Max, for example, doesn't bother. He doesn't really think that it helps much. It helps for the first few laps, but when it gets really tough, the water, the cooling at that point is already very much warmed up. Doesn't really help you. That's Max's opinion. Others may disagree. what it does mean, even if you don't use it, you have to have ballast in your car instead. So that's the mandate here with the heat hazard being officially declared. But the last time it was declared was Singapore, and Ferrari had a bit of a nightmare. So the implication is that those brakes are already in a pretty difficult spot. So while there might be sources suggesting that internally at Maranello, they're kind of confident, the lift and coast that Hamilton and Leclerc are probably going to have to do is not going to make anyone especially happy, at least not if you are a Ferrari fan. The other teams, though, maybe so. Just to quickly mention, these are the temperatures for the US Grand Prix in Austin over the last few years. The record is 2013, when it was nearly 32 degrees. The last few years, 21, 22, 23, 24, all been very similar, 28, 29, 30 degrees Celsius, of course, this is. Potentially this year we're going to get close to, if not past that. What do you guys think is going to happen the next couple of days? Enter your thoughts as ever in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.